Hello everyone. Good evening to all. We are gathered here for the final event, which is a part of the fourth edition of Egaro Photo Festival. As we know, Egaro Photo Festival has gone online this year, and one can visit our exhibition at www.agarophotofestival.com. We are gathered here to speak about photo books with Anshika Varma. Anshika Varma is a documentary photographer with interest in personal, collective, and mythical history. Through photography and bookmaking, she is interested in exploring the intricate relationship between memory and object as markers of one's identity. In 2018, Anshika founded Offset Projects. Offset Projects works to create channels of engagement in photography and bookmaking through artist talks, workshops, residencies, curated reading rooms, and collaborative exercises in publishing. Hello, Anshika. Welcome.
Hi, Abhijit. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that very, very in-depth introduction as well. Uh, it's awkward to be on the receiving end of your own introduction, but I think, like you said, these are all parts of the virtual format that we're slowly understanding as we go forward.
Yes. I think we can start because we have quite a lot of people with us. So I think without
Okay.
further ado, we can start. Yeah.
Great, great. Thank you
Over to
so
you.
much. Gladly taking the stage, let's say over here. It's interesting, I'm having a quick look, and it seems a lot of the people who are here are photographers themselves. So it helps me kind of think a little bit and orient myself a little bit for this talk. At the outset, let me just say, let this not be one long monologue. I think these kind of conversations become more interesting when we have like a little bit of a tug, a little bit of a back and forth on like what I'm saying and what you think about it. So Abhijit is thankfully going to really help us moderate this session, and he'll be, if you have any questions and all, please let's make it as interactive as we can. The idea of photo books is extremely simple in so many ways and yet very daunting in so many others. And so what we had thought about, to start off with a workshop, obviously owing to the logistics of the festival, not just the festival this year, but maybe the whole world this year and the last, we thought let's start off on a virtual format and then see where and how it can go. What I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to just share my screen. Abhijit, let me know if it works and if you can actually.
Yeah, we can see
one
it.
second.
Yeah.
You can see, but I think I'm showing you the last page. So I'll do this again, and then we can start. So, one of the things that's very interesting when we think about the photo book is that, one of the questions that always comes up to me when I'm doing programs within Offset or even otherwise is, how do I make the photo book distinct from the book? And does the book need to be distinct from the photo book? We'll try and answer some of these questions that I will also put up to you. And it'll be great to know your thoughts on it as well. I think one of the basic questions to start with, a lot of us today look at the book as a form. And what's important for me is to always question yourself as a photographer, as a publisher, as someone who's just doing an experiment to say, why is it that you want to make a photo book? Invariably, we'll get into the logistics and technicalities of book making slowly. But I think at a conceptual stage, if you're able to kind of really investigate on why you're looking at a particular body of work in a book form, it will really help create your own unique book in that sense. Very often what ends up happening is that we think about photography as a project, and then we say, how do we convert this project into a book? And I find that, if we kind of separate the two entities, what you end up doing while you're making a book is that you end up thinking about templates, and you end up thinking about what is the format of a book that might work for my project. And I just say, take 2 steps back at this point of time and think about it. Think about if you were to approach your photography project in the same way. Think about if you were thinking of, very avid example, but if you're thinking of making a book on your birthday party, I mean, I don't know, right? So you, and if you were to think about creating the project, and as a retrospect, right, there is a certain organicness that comes into it, right? Because you're kind of really present in the moments where you're creating those images. And I think the book has to be approached in a very similar manner, because when you think about the book, you have to understand the different elements that put it together. And then what's interesting is to say, what is the language of these elements that we're engaging with? What is the technique of these elements that we're engaging with? And that will invariably help us decide what kind of a book do we want to make. For many of you who might be following more documentary based subjects, the book is a very tricky space, because are you wanting to make something exclusive? Are you wanting to make something that becomes accessible to the world? And those kind of questions will help you decide what kind of material you want to use, what kind of sizes you want to use, how is it that you want the people to feel at the end of a book. And we'll go over these slowly in this talk as well. One of the questions that I've always looked at or thought about when thinking about making a book is, what is it that the book is going to offer us at a point of time when we are surrounded by images? They are bodies of photographic work that we see online, as videos, as Instagram projects, and they're all, I don't mean to create any demarcation, because they're all acts of publishing. So when we are thinking about publishing a body of work, it could be online, it could be through an editorial magazine, it could be in a gallery, it could be a film. But the decision to make a book expands your scope of authorship to a very large degree, because suddenly you're going to give your reader, whether they're sitting under a tree, I don't know, soaking up some winter sun, or whether they are sitting inside their homes, it's a way to control how much attention they can get distracted, how distracted they can get, and how much attention you can grasp from them. This is how I think about it. There are many other ways, obviously. But again, I feel that all of these tiny bits really make a very big impact when we're thinking about what kind of a book that we would like to make. And this is where I would actually say that books are not necessarily, photo books are not necessarily made only out of photography. They're made out of ideas. And depending on how you would want your book, what kind of a relationship you want your book to create with its reader, you might end up shooting differently. You might end up looking at your concept very differently, or your theme very differently. And it's actually just that, because very often when you sit with your images and start slapping them on the pages, sometimes you'll find that they're ending up becoming a catalog, a portfolio of your work, right? And in that dynamic, they become kind of like passive objects. So how is it that we can infuse our ideas within the book altogether? And that is where, for me, photo book comes. It exists as a concept in its entirety, right? There are different elements of the book that have their own language that then interact with photography and create a completely different experience. So when we're thinking about the book, what are the different elements of a book that we engage with? I will maybe at some point also pick out a book and help elaborate that on the video. But in no specific order, when we're thinking about images, We have the editing of an image, which is very, very critical to the rhythm and the sense of time in a book. We have text, which can be used in very, very different ways. We have the size of the book. We have layouts that run within a book. We have the cover, the spine, the paper that's used. And that, I think, in many ways for me, these are not all elements. Books change as we move forward. But I think these comprise to make a book, and interrogations within this make the book yours to a very large degree. When we say editing, why I wanted to bring up editing right in the beginning is because how we look at editing changes based on the material and the medium that we engage with. So when we're talking about editing for a book that might end up having a very personal experience, your editing can change completely based on how you engage with it in the book. Again, a very, very small example. Let's continue with the images that you have on from your birthday party, right? Like you guys have decided that you would like to take photographs of a particular evening spent on a birthday. And so as we move from the book, let's say as we turn from one page to the other, we are moving within a certain timeline, right? How we pace that timeline is so dependent on what follows, what image follows which. It could be a collage or a montage of really intense high-speed cuts, as you would see in a film. It could be starting out with a room where you're going to have your birthday party and then just going into tiny details of every single element that exists in that room. And when I kind of get with both these edits, even though it might be a book where I might be turning the pages left to right, the pace at which I am reading that book completely changes. Because if this is let's say this is my establishing shot of the room where the birthday party is going to be, and then I move here and it's suddenly a very tight shot of someone running behind me with a cake that they want to smash in my face, and the third photograph is actually my face with cake all over it, right? So I'm offering a certain kind of rhythm, a certain kind of timeline that exists through that narrative. On the other hand, if I start with the same image of an establishing shot of a room, but then I begin to go into really tiny details of someone giving me a book that I've really wanted for my birthday, right? Or someone very slowly trying to put the finishing touches to the cake, right? Suddenly, the rhythm slows down. I'm looking at things very differently. And for editing in a book, you really need to know what begins to happen with that rhythm, because that will then define layout for you. We have, for better or worse, become stuck with this idea of the birthday party. So I'm going to keep
and, and, and it gives out a very real life situation in the most vernacular way possible. So I think we're good to go with it.
Okay, that sounds good. So apart from the celebratory elements and the gifts and people smashing cream on my face, let's say when we get into layouts, how do we change that pacing? How do we move something that might be linear into non-linear, And that is where I feel a layout format works really, really interestingly. I'm going to show you some spreads out of certain books that we've had in the library, and we've had a chance to kind of work with particular authors as well. This is a book called Days Untitled by Sadia. And Sadia Mariam, who's a Bangladeshi photographer. I'm not sure if all of you know of her work previously or not. Days Untitled is actually got to do with a particular timeline in which Sadia was confined into a room. And it's her recollecting those days and recollecting what it felt like to be closed in, and what it did to her emotionally, psychologically, but also in a very performative way. And so, in many ways, if you see the layout here, I mean, one thing why I wanted to start with this is because we're always very used to turning our pages to the left and not so much to the top. And an inversion of that by default tells you that there is something that's very different that's happening in this book. And it looks at it from a psychological point of view.
And right away sort of resets your entire orientation itself.
Exactly. So suddenly, you get a book like this and you think, oh, hey, I'm supposed to open it like that. But the minute you do that, you realize the world's a bit upside down. So you actually have to engage with it. You have to turn. And that's a very small way by which she's grabbing your attention. She's making sure that you can't get lazy about reading this book. You have to be present through it, right? Even the way that she works with text over here, the way that she places herself, she's at the bottom in all these images. And the text, which we'll get to, we'll start discussing a lot of these images that I will show you through, like we'll mix it up, let's just say. But in terms of layout, there is a kind of a clinical cleanliness that she has to the layout, where the top will always have text. It's a particular kind of text. There's a particular kind of font that she's used within that. And then the bottom of it is the image. So it's kind of very staccato, very cold. It's not like images are not kind of whooshing through in your head. And if you were to think about it, the same project could be approached very differently when you're talking about confinement. You could also bring in a complete craziness to it, right? But over here, the fact that she's decided to go in a particular visual language also orients us and prepares us for what she was going through. It offers kind of like a psychological perspective to those days, right? Sorry, you wanted to say something, Abhijit?
No, please continue.
Okay. I mean, similar to that, now this is something that goes a little bit into chaos, right? This is Tawfikur's work, which has actually got to do with dentistry, let's just say, right? And it's an exploration that he picks up, and you can almost see this kind of like obsessive look at a particular field that he belongs to. I'm just trying to kind of draw very, very different parallels. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and keep it quick and allow for some space where, we can in fact start talking and discussing. But then you have this book, which is very interesting because over here, as you will notice, images get cut at the edges of the frame. Right? And I say frame, but I actually mean pages, right? And what's interesting here is actually that the artist has, in this particular scenario, organized or designed this book in a manner where when he was editing the book, he created this layout, right? As you can see behind me on the wall, usually that's how we get into editing, right? You take prints, you kind of spread them out, you make little groups and clusters, and then you kind of try and weave through those narratives as you move from one segment of your work to the other. The interesting thing this author did is that he had this layout with him, and he decided he's not going to move the design of that.
Okay.
So it was a big sheet where the images were placed exactly how he had imagined them, as constellations almost of some sort, where it's like a stream of consciousness that's kind of flowing through. And I think if you can, I don't know if you can read the text on the bottom tile of this, but you talk, Claudia Crystal talks about how Puklus, who's the author, turns his subjects inside out and builds them again from scratch to find new meaning. This is kind of almost like an exercise in looking at timelessness, right? Because everything coexists at the same time. And so you have an image that maybe is running out of the pages over here, but it'll join in on the next segment, right? So it's also creating this little bit of an anxiety with you as a reader to say things are not just what they seem to be, let's just say, right? Uh, Similarly, we have the idea of gatefolds, right? Gatefolds allow for narratives to become layered in very, very interesting ways. Gatefolds are also, they're one kind of a particular fold that you can use when you're thinking about binding, but it's probably something that is minimal and can be extremely weighed. And these images are, of course, from Adil Hassan's book When Abba Was Ill. But what I'm going to try and suggest is we relocate ourselves at that birthday party, right? And we have these images now, right, which are going in a sequence of what happens. So friends come in, people are playing, someone's having a nice laugh with a bunch of friends, someone's eating snacks, you know. So imagine that's the sequence with which you're going into your book. But parallel to this, now let's say you arrive at a center page where we have, on the left hand side, we have an image of a girl receiving a gift, and on the right hand side we have an image of the same girl just having just playing with her friends, let's say, right? And then you open the folds of this page, which is, as you realize, is a gatefold. But when you see inside, you see an isolated toy that's been shoved into a corner, and you see a very tight shot of meat being sliced into half, right? Suddenly, the layers of this birthday party, or your idea of what's happening at this birthday party, changes completely. Because it seems like, yes, everything's really nice and everything's really celebratory and everyone's really excited, but then it allows you to kind of bring in this undercurrent of attention that maybe you want to talk about, I'm obviously creating a very horror
A sort of a sort of
guy.
subplot opens up, maybe.
A subplot, in some ways, and sometimes it's like, in the description that I'm giving you, it's a subplot, right? But now imagine if you were to talk about a historical movement that was happening at a particular time in history, and you end up using these gatefolds and into a perspective of what's happening in the outside public realm of the world, which can be your archives of public archives, and then you insert it with these gatefolds that might have an inner world and its functionings going on. You might have archival images of movements or meetings that were being held more underground, of protesters actually coming together, let's just say. I'm of course changing the entire plot from our birthday, but it can be used as language. And now, if this is something that you're aware of, right, how you would shoot, or what kind of images you would incorporate into your project, how you would think about editing, would change massively, right? So that's what I mean when I say, when we talk about intersecting ideas, we really need to know what is the language of what we are playing with. We have Happy Good Night over here, which looks at a very tiny, intimate moment which the author's parents shared every evening before they went to sleep. And it's an exploration of that one evening that took place in this author's house every day for 20 years, right? And what it allows for is, I see we have a little bit of time remaining. I hope it gets extended. But I'm going to...
Yeah, I think it has never happened before, because sorry
Never
everyone,
gone
I'm
this
pausing. No. The thing is that I think I have kept everybody, non-participants, not joined
Okay.
in, but so it has not.
Let's see, and if that happens, maybe we can figure out a different way. So I'm going to very quickly then move into text, and the role of text which is as visual. You'll see in Sophie Kahl's images that text becomes almost a lead. It almost plays the role of the photograph itself. Then there's text as archive and image. And there is text that allows you to kind of look into a deeper understanding of the subject that we're talking about. So you have text that is visual over here, but text that also is contextual. And we'll come to the spine. Sorry, I'm going to rush this really fast. But within
It's okay. It's
spines.
okay. I think we can always rejoin. The entire thing will be there. So
Oh, amazing.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think we'll have to just rejoin. Maybe because we haven't upgraded to a premium subscription. That's the case.
Okay, no worries, no worries. So we're then going to get into the spine. So we've spoken about the inside elements. We've spoken about our content, about the edits, about the way that layouts happen within that, how text can play with images. And then we come to the outside. And for me, the spine is really, really important. You have to think about every single element in your book as a way of communicating your project, right? So the spine, we have different kinds of spines that do exist. We have unbound and bound spines. Unbound spines would probably be something like the accordion, right? Where you might not have a stitch going through it, but it holds the pages together as well. Over here, I have some examples of a bound spine where I'm going to show you this very tiny detail, which you'll notice in a lot of the books that you do hold up. And this is very important for all hardcover bound spines, especially when they have a lot of volume, because they allow you flexibility to be able to open your pages much better. We have Rohit Saha's 1528, where he actually took elastic bands and made a spine out of it, which was rather innovative. This is what we have as an open spine, where you can actually see the stitches of the book. And these, again, all of these have particular connotations that they bring about. Over here, you immediately think of a filing cabinet. With open spines, you do think about something that's more raw, more rustic, more revealing. Whereas the hardbound book with the covered spine that we have over here will always connote to some idea of something that's more finished, Here, of course, we have an unusual cover and spine by Kevin Wiley's book, which is 100 Daughters and 100 Meals. And over here, we have something that goes into a zigzag. So you actually have two books contained within one, being held together by the spine. Let's now come to the cover. The cover itself, we have hard covers, soft covers, covers for covers that we will slowly get into over this. So this is the book that I was talking about, where the author had made these constellations. And what's interesting is that on the cover itself, he has chosen to create almost like a layout of what that larger spread looks like, which then gets cut across into pages. So this will give you an idea of what you're also going to look at inside and why it might not make sense and why images might get cut off, right? You have this is an interesting thing because it's a book, it's a collection of images that were picked up from a local market. And then the photographer, worked on these images and created new images out of them. But how he chose to sell them and how he chose to present that work was to put it in a box as a collection of prints, very similar to how he had received it. We have the Anita Singh's covers that come in, which, I don't know if you're familiar with or not, but they offer kind of like a protective shield to when you might have a series of books that you want to put together. This is a standard hardcover book where we also have a small little bit of a thing where you're looking at an emboss of an image in it. You can also play with cover and create an interaction between cover and the inside pages, as we've seen in this particular book with Devashish. So the cover is green, and as you can see, he's got a title page and everything that comes in, but he's isolated the word Pakistani over
Pakistani, yeah.
here.
So when you see, so when
Right?
you just see
So
it,
when
yeah, it just says Pakistani. So
Yes. So when you see the book, it's a green book with just a cut that says Pakistani in it. And he's kind of trying to provoke you because he's also talking about this land which is in India and not in India, but these trees are considered Pakistani over there, you know? And so it's really in line with the rest of the content that goes inside the book as well. Coming to sleeves and covers, we have Yin Yang's Gold Coast, where the cover was kind of like her starting point when we're talking about her inspiration. She really wanted to play with this idea of something that's very clean and pink and virginal in some ways, which is what she felt Gold Coast was viewed as. And then you open this book, and this book has this textured material that almost makes you feel like you're touching something very icky, very, it's got these bumps and it's not a smooth look. So she wanted to play with that idea of it is not what it appears to be through material. And this is what I meant when I talked about, when you want to show a sequence of books put together. We are very, very close to the end of our talk, where, I wanted to carry forward from what we spoke about with Ying's book, where you talk about paper and the materiality of paper. Largely speaking, there are two forms of paper that do exist. There's the coated and the uncoated paper. Both have their own properties and their own, I think, emotional connections. A coated paper is something that will offer you a slight bit of a sheen on top because there's a little coating on it that seals the inks, to the paper. The uncoated paper, as you can imagine, because it's uncoated, it has a very rough feel, maybe something very similar to the backdrop that I've used, for this presentation. But a lot of it has got to do with because there is no coating on top, the images also do not last for as long. Both papers have different emotional scales that they can play with, and that will bring me back to thinking about the concept behind your book while you're thinking about making a book. And coming to the last element that we have, which is size, really think about what you want to say. A large
Anshika, I
book.
Anshika, I would just like to pause you for a moment. So it says less
Okay,
than a minute is remaining. So I think we all can rejoin in the same link. This is
sure.
not
Okay.
yeah. So
Sounds good.
so
So
I
just
think
exit and then enter again.
yeah, hopefully it
Okay.
should work.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
everyone,
Thank you.
please join us. Please join us with the same meeting ID and password. We thank you all. Okay, please rejoin. Really sorry about
See
this.
you guys in another minute.
Yeah. So okay, I'll end the meeting maybe, or I'll stay back. I'm seeing people are still joining in. So what we can do is, can we just do a quick recap sort of a thing? I mean, like of the
Sounds good.
last two topics. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What I can do is, let me just quickly take this from the beginning, and I'll just very quickly click through what we've got. Abhijit, could you give me screen
Yeah.
sharing?
So since it's a new meeting again, so I'll have to just.
Yeah.
I think it should.
Yeah. Yeah. This is working. Yes. Can you see?
Yes.
Are we back to square one? Yeah. Okay. So I'll very quickly, run us through this, and it'll be nice to maybe share and talk a little bit about the concept and the motivations behind the book once we've wrapped up with the technicalities. But also to look at at a time when everyone is making photo books. Why is it that we're making a photo book is something that I think is very important that we need to think about. What is it that we need the photo book to do? What type of a relationship or what kind of a response or provocation are we expecting to have from our readers? And what are our intentions for creating those provocations as well become very important to think about. And that, I mean, I think these are ideas, and we have to think about how can these ideas then translate into books, because books, should be able to have their own life and their own identity as well. They are like photographs in many ways, where once you make it and put it out in the world, there is very little control that you have over it. So what you can hope to do is to distill your idea into this form and hope that that idea allows for questions or conversations to then emerge. We're of course looking at photo book as concept, which I think we should discuss a little bit after, since we got into the
We
technicalities,
have
that
a few
is for,
questions. Yeah.
and then we'll move into concept, right?
Yes.
Elements of a photo book that we've spoken about: the edit, the intention of the edit, and how edit changes because of the material that you're working with, because of the medium that you're working with, which in this particular case will become the book. The text, which can be like the image itself, it can be more important than the image, it can be less important than the image, but what is the purpose of this text? And how is it that this text can then work in tandem with your images? The size of the book. If you want someone to think about a memory or someone to work with the idea of loss, and you give them a book that is really tiny in size, maybe the size of your mobile phone, or a humongous tabloid size, the impact of that is going to also have its influence on the images that you choose to put in there. We have the layout. Once you have the edit, text, and size, you get into how can you then weave in these conversations through your layout, through your cover. What is it that, people like to be quiet on the cover, people like to provoke through the cover, people like to establish some kind of grounding for the conversation that's to follow, or sometimes people like to just leave it as a blank so that it's kind of like an empty page that you're starting out with. The spine itself, what's interesting is all of these elements have a language of their own. And the dynamics of all of these, the one that I haven't really put in, which is probably another entire session, is font. That requires a completely different session on its own. It's like understanding photography and understanding font,
Typography and photography.
Yes, it's a completely, consuming segment of the book as well to look into. But from the cover and the spine, we get into the paper. And I think that is where we were. Just as a recap that we were doing in editing, we're talking about sequences that allow for linear or non-linear editing. And the edit, as happens with slideshows, as happens with galleries, but I think more critically, as happens in a book, is that the edit also lays down the pace and the rhythm with which your reader is going to turn the page to go to the next segment of what you have to say. Editing, like we said, can be chaotic, can be organized, can be minimal, can be very zine-like, very provocative. And all of these understandings are ruled by, again, coming down to your core concept when you're making this work. Your layouts can allow a rhythm that is staccato, that is slow, that allows a certain different kind of a pace that's chaotic, that can disorient and disengage you, or that can offer you parallel renditions of storytelling within the same work. Again, the accordion over here is something that one has to think about very carefully, because on the one hand, you're reading it page by page, but the accordion also should make sense to you when you open it out, right? It should almost become like a cinemascape, maybe, not cinematic always, but in terms of how we read it, that rhythm becomes very important in an accordion as well. We then come down to text, which I said text can be visual in itself. When you look at Sophie Cahl's work, the text is as important and as evocative as the image in itself. So we have text as context, which is, let's say in the Dalit book, we have an archive of images that does exist, but they're contextualized by whether text exists as caption or as poetry or as prose that's been taken from the Dalit movement, protest movement itself. So these might not be explanatory texts, but they run parallel to each other to allow the reader to get a holistic understanding of a time period that the book tries to explain. You also have text as a navigator, and in that I would say, so we have Sophie Cahl here where text is visual. Here text is kind of like a navigator because it's also offering you a certain direction in which it shifts that direction into how images move from one to the other, right? In Rohit Saha's case, there is a lot of text, but yet it is not as text. It is almost as visual. I believe you had a conversation with Rohit as well I'm sure he will elaborate.
Yes, exactly. And I think we've taken part, and I personally took part in the Gupta Gul session with Rohit as well. So where he says these are like, the text which is there a lot, but it's still, sometimes not decipherable. It's allegorical to the files that are piled up about all the cases.
Absolutely, you've got that bang on. Moving again where visual becomes text as well, in this particular thread, let's say, where you've taken a photograph, but the photograph is of text. And so there's a duality that begins to play between text and visuals in this particular book. Again,
I would just like to ask about something because, just a second, let me make sure. Okay, so since we're talking about text, so recently we had a conversation with Soumya Shankar Bose as well about it's sort of a retrospective of his entire body of work. But where we had an interesting discussion that where he says there is I think there is an insert about a Bengali text in his latest book, and then there is an English translation. So like for a Bengali, that becomes the Bengali text just becomes a sort of information, but for somebody else it just becomes a visual information sort of a thing, so which is not decipherable, and then you refer to the next one. So something of that sort. I think it's something of same sort. I can't see the entire thing, but yeah.
No, what you're talking in terms of Shoma's book, that is when we bring in inserts, right? The text. So there's two kinds of text that exists in his book. One is the text that is printed along with the images, which is kind of very informational, very statistical almost in many ways. And then you have an essay that he has republished, I think, and translated, if I'm not mistaken, which goes in as an insert, which is not, unfortunately, I would have to say, which is not stitched to the book. And again, one really has to think about what is the purpose of that text. It becomes very important to know why we are using this particular text. And in Shomo's case, as you correctly said, that for him it was also important, that people who live outside of Bengal also are aware of the historically, how should I say, controlled versions of history that have existed, let's just say, right? And so it became very important for him to offer a translated version of that text for people who are non-Bengali speaking or reading, to even understand the very, very detailed history of the massacre that did take place.
That's a good one.
And so it's a separated insert. And I've had this conversation with Soumya even during a Guftagu, where I said that I was very surprised to see that it wasn't part. I mean, it's part of the book, but it's almost, it can be dismissed as well, you know. And so it was interesting to note his response to it, because, you know, from his perspective, what he felt was that that is additional to the work that he's created, and that's why it was something that wasn't stitched in, as opposed to usually one would find that a context is kind of bound in with the book. And for him, he wanted to say that this is my work, which is an artistic expression of history that has taken place, and the insert is actual historical information, and so that's why it was kept separate. You know, so I mean, these are the kind of details that one really needs to think about and be sure of, you know, and when you're making a book, because these are small details that we take for granted when we're reading the book, right? But the fact that we can take these things for granted means that they have been so thoroughly thought out that they don't kind of hit as awkward to us. The best form of design is design that's invisible. And why we say that is because if you get consumed with the design, the book's kind of lost somewhere in the middle of that. So I think, it becomes very important for the same reasons to then address every element as importantly as the photograph, you know.
I had this question written down. So it's like whether, because like to somebody who is making a book for the first time, it might be overwhelming to take care of all of these things. I mean, like, and as we go in deeper, it just increases. The list just goes on. So like now, and I think it has been answered. In the context of question, we have two questions. So should we go ahead with them?
Yeah, let's take them. In fact, if someone would like, we can also activate their audios and videos and kind of get there.
Yeah, please. You can send us a request. If you can, be a part of the conversation, I will be happy to. I'd be happy to allow you in. So, back to the question. So, Deep asks, what other creative medium interests you, or you take interest from? So, I'm guessing he's saying it from the perspective of bookmaking.
Right. Well, what's interesting is that we often tend to think of bookmaking in only one form, very similar to the photographs that you're seeing in front of you. And I think in today's time, one has to expand their understanding of bookmaking to maybe publishing. So when we talk about, I am interested in looking at different acts of publishing, different forms of publishing that do exist, and what is the impact of those to the work that's being created. This is from the offset projects perspective. As an individual artist and a photographer myself, I will not, tragically maybe, and you can contest me on this, I will not say that the book is the only ideal form. Each work has its own demands and expectations based on the narratives of that work. And I think it's very important to follow that. Just to give you a little kind of like an example, I have one body of work that is existing in multiple mediums and formats right now. It's a work that I'm developing as a book for the last 2 years almost. It was supposed to come out this year, but owing to last year, we could not finish some of the shoots that we had scheduled, and so it's still in a dummy stage, but hopefully by the end of this year, we'll see more form come to place. But so it's a work about a forest that that lived very close to where I grew up in Delhi, and it's me kind of acknowledging the loss of this forest. And so the work has existed, of course, in its entirety as still images that have been shot on film, and it was exhibited as still images as well. It exists in the form of audio recordings that I have done within the forest. It exists in the form of these installations that I created where I was actually collecting and foraging from the foraging soil from different parts of the forest where my memories were contained. And this was then in an exhibition actually put up as almost like memory boxes, but memory jars. I'm obsessed with, if there is one obsession that I do have in terms of form, it is memory boxes. Every single body of work that I have done has somehow been contained within different formats and versions of memory boxes over the years. And in some ways, I think the book that's formulating is also a different kind of a memory box right now. So I mean, for me, there is no fixed way of expressing a particular concept. It does depend on what the work needs to be. Because I was in a forest and I was foraging all kinds of flora, fauna, objects, stones, everything, they all began to manifest in different ways. I did a whole series of prints actually that were created out of natural pigments in the leaves themselves. So they are visual, but they're not photographic, maybe in some ways, And so every single manifestation is still the work, and the book is still the work, and the prints are still the work. So sometimes I feel like we need to unbox ourselves from the idea that a work should exist in one form. If it's a concept that you're keen to explore, then really think about the manifestations of every concern that you might have within it. I don't know if that really.
Absolutely. I mean, like, if I were to see it as a form of an exhibition where the entire work is showcased. So the book that you're planning to make is just a part of the entire thing. The soundscape becomes one part. Maybe the prints become, the memory box becomes one part. So maybe some sort of a projection becomes the other part. So the entire ensemble sort of, and the book becomes just a part of it, not in any way the end of the entire work.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we did during my exhibition, because I think it was a bit overwhelming for a lot of people, but I started growing different plants inside the room that had to be the exhibition. And I got in tree trunks that had been discarded and I wet them and created like a moisture kind of an environment so that when people walk in, there's a particular smell that they're able to take in. We obviously had prints. I had made peepholes with light boxes and exhibited the prints, and we had a projection of the night sky that one could see from the ridge in Delhi as well. And the book was actually contained inside a tree trunk. So it was a dummy version even then, but it was inside a tree trunk. So you kind of had to go in and then look at it. And for me, I think that's probably the closest thing that I've had to the right form, which is basically a mix of a bunch of things,
Totally. So we have another question. So it's from Abhinav Nath. So Abhinav says, when do you decide that your project is ready to be turned into a photo book?
When do you decide if your project is ready? I think it's something that you have to kind of be aware of what all exists within the photo book. There are variations of, as you read through the material, as you're creating your edits, I think you will realize how the work needs to be expressed. There are certain works that are pushed into a photo book, unfortunately, that probably needed to exist only as exhibitions. There are particular bodies of work that, that might, the engagement might actually become a lot more exciting when one is dealing with a more immersive experience, let's say, or when the quietness of the book might not be enough, and then you need to be kind of aware of that. But when you realize that the project is ready for a photo book, I guess in many ways it could be right from the beginning, and in some, you're always looking to finish that photo book. I think what's most important is to know why you're doing that work. How do you want people to receive that work? And, what is the scale at which you would like people to receive that work? What is the environment in which you'd like people to receive that work? And I think those answers will lead you to decide whether you need to make it as a book or not. These are just from my perspective. Everyone has their own versions of, that decisive moment.
Mhm. Okay, so we have quite a few questions pouring in. So this one is from
Maybe I should stop sharing the screen since,
yes,
we've
yes,
had
so,
a
yeah,
animation.
okay. So this,
Yeah. I've also realized it's getting a little dark. Just give me a
yes,
second. Let me switch on some light. Yes.
okay. So the next question is from Preksha Kothari. She's asking, as a beginner, should person first work and complete the process of creating the photos, and then after that work on the elements of photo book, or both should go parallel?
See, it's different people have different personalities. What I would suggest though is that even if you do finish the photography aspect of the work before you get into the book, be open to adaptations that you might need to make to the work because of the book form also. Very often you'll start doing an edit and you'll start doing a layout and you'll say, I need these images to kind of complete what I want the book to say. So if you have assumed in your head that now I've shot everything, I don't need anything else with me, that can become very restrictive also for your book, because the book is a different language. It needs to find its own communication channels as well. So I would personally say that always do like your first phase of shooting completely without thinking about the book, then sit down and think only about the book, and then look at your images, and you'll know where you need to kind of fill it in. But in many ways it's a back and forth kind of a relationship. I feel like you can't isolate the photography from the editing and the bookmaking completely. What's good is, similar to if you start thinking about like how you're going to shoot and you'll never really end up shooting, it's a little similar to that. So I think you should shoot first completely from your heart, and don't let that be guided by any formats of any sort. Be very instinctive about the work that you're doing, and then sit with it and look at what your instinct has given birth to, and look at what these images are like and what kind of potential they hold, and then you'll kind of know what you need the book to be and what other elements you might want the book to then have in it. Then you might have to go for another round of shooting, and then it's like that back and forth kind of a relationship between edit and shooting and layouts.
And back and forth. So I think it answers the next question that we had. Is so any insights when one could actually start about making the photo book? So it's about like you summed up. Say you go through for one round after shooting, one round through the book, and then maybe think what's missing or maybe what's not, and then come back, and then it's an ongoing circular sort of a thing.
It is. I mean, it's coming back to like where we started. It's when we were talking about what is the concept? Why is it that you want to make a photo book? A lot of these questions are answered when you know your concept very well, when you've engaged with your subject, when you've engaged with the subject matter of what you would like to shoot. And so for that, you definitely need to, there is a little bit of a risk, when you start thinking about the book before you've thought of your concept, because what that will lead to is creating a book that's made out of gimmick as opposed to out of relevance to the context. And so I think one should always begin with photography if you're talking about a photo book, and then work from there, but not limit yourself to say that just because I've photographed this, if the book needs something else, you should be open to going back into the field or wherever you are, wherever you're shooting, to add to that.
True, true, very true. We have another question, and now since I think it's very much relevant. Okay, we have two more. So I'll get to this one because we're having this talk on an online platform. So with creation of digital spaces, do you think it is possible to showcase your work using e-photo books, and how could one approach it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think e-photo books is, you can go really rudimentary and basic on it and upload your PDF. If you look at the Monsanto book, for me, that was the first time that I was completely overwhelmed by this idea, where a photographer spent, I think he almost spent about a decade creating a very, very hardcore documentary book on the practices by Monsanto, and how destructive their processes are. And there were a few, I can't remember the print run that existed. Maybe Rohan, who I know is here, maybe Rohan might know it. Rohan, if you do, please message and let me know. But what was amazing about the author was that once the editions were completely sold out, he made the book accessible as downloadable PDFs for free. And for him, why he had to do that was, I mean, it was a very important decision that he made, to say that for me, the information that I'm putting out is a lot more important than the artistic value of the book or the artistic price of the book. So he made he made a print run that sold out, I think, almost within a few months of its release. But that didn't mean that if, as a viewer, you wanted access to that information, it wasn't available to you. So there is one version, which is the downloadable PDF, which has a very different, almost kind of a movement, that's going around it. Then you have, I mean, in many ways, let's say Skin of Chitwan, is an act of publishing. It re-looks at the book. I think where we might get restricted is if we want to replicate the physical or the physicality of the book on the virtual space, because then you're going to end up with a little bit of a mishmash, So either I mean, this is my own personal opinion, but I haven't delved or experimented much with virtual books, to be honest. I feel like one is where you have the PDF that's uploaded as is, which allows a reader to not get caught up with everything else that might be going on in a screen. Like it's a format that they're used to. They know that they have to go on to the next page.
Yeah.
Or you think of it as an act of publishing, and you think about the dynamics that exist within the virtual world. There's so many tools that exist within that that I am honestly not even aware of. And once you begin to understand programming within that, the UI UX experience, which is a terminology I just recently learned, and there's so many different tools to kind of allow for a different level of engagement and interaction virtually, that it's important to incorporate that. Otherwise you're doing something like the book becoming a catalog, where you're just having images on the left and the right. So it's the same thing. That I definitely think that there's a lot that's possible online. I unfortunately do not know much about it, but it's something worth exploring for sure.
So, since we grazed upon the idea of UI UX, since Egaro is online this time, so we had to deal.
You know a lot about it.
We had to deal with it a lot, and it's slightly it's slightly tricky at some point, because what happens is that there is a mediator which transforms our vision to the technical person, and the technical person may or may not be at par with what we are thinking. So there is an angle of time. There has been serendipitous outputs. So I mean, it's something completely new and worth exploring, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll now see the engagement with virtual formats much beyond we have imagined up until now. So exciting times ahead.
Absolutely. So apparently we are running out of time again. So we have
Yes, again.
so I mean, like, it has been such an great conversation that we keep on renewing the meeting again and again. But I think this time we'll pull the plug. So we have 6 odd minutes. So since you also spoke about the idea about an exhibition catalog, so there is a question: what is the difference between, from Ansi? She says, what is the difference between a photo book and an exhibition catalog? So to that, I would just like to add up something like, how do you see these three things: the photo book, the exhibition catalog, and the
And the, sorry?
zine.
And the Z. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ansi. It's an interesting question. So an exhibition catalog will always be very different from an artist catalog. What I was referring to was an artist catalog. But just to kind of very quickly touch upon this, an exhibition catalog, I mean, in my perspective, and I would love to see new experiments with it. Up until now, with exhibition catalogs, it's been very, it's almost like using an image as an illustration, right? So it's to say that this is something that happened, and here is your visual proof for the fact that this exhibition happened. It's very, very clean, very, very simple, but very often it does not look at authorship. And that's the point at which I think there's a distinction between the two. When you're talking about a catalog, even if it's something that artists make themselves, or if it's an exhibition catalog, then it would invariably be made by a gallery, I'd imagine, or an institution of some sort. The dynamics of using the language of printed matter, let's just say, gets diluted because you're looking at, and I mean, invariably you also have group exhibitions. So then you just have this catalog that looks at 3 images by each artist or 4 images by each artist. And what that, I mean, in my opinion, what that does is that it does not offer any kind of perspective into who the artist is, what are the motivations of the artist. They'll do that by probably inserting a really concise 200-word text piece, right? And not to say that there's anything wrong with it. I think what's important to understand is that every element exists for its own purpose. So an exhibition catalog is a document that's like an evidence to say these events happened and these were the people involved in that event. What ends up happening is that because that's, especially photographically, that's been the larger format that's existed in the region as far as artists consolidating their work, is concerned. Even if it's artists, I mean, when I say artists, I'm talking outside of photography even, is that very often one kind of puts it together to say, this is what my project is about. So even if you have to send in a document to say, what is your work like? You put in an artist statement in the beginning, you put in each of the images that you might have, or photographs of an exhibition that you might have had, and you put in your bio within that, right? The book is a place where the book is like your photograph, right? It is asking you to take ownership of a medium and a material that you're working with. So there are so many dynamics that one can then use to create that book as something that is expressive of their identity, their politics, their perspective, their memory. And I feel, and not to say that every work has to be like that. Sometimes some works do require to be minimal, and over intervention of medium can also take away from the value of that work. And that's why it's very important to understand your work conceptually, to know where you might need to be very minimal, where you might need to get very intensive, even with materiality. But I feel the difference, largely speaking, with a book is that you have the choice to play with that materiality, to add to the voice of the work that you're creating in some ways. And Abhijit, expanding from that to the zine is a different beast itself. It's very, very exciting. For sure, it's something that has it has no rules, and that's what I love about it. It could be stapled, it could be folded, it could be bound, it could be unbound, it could make sense or not. And I've had the fortunate chance to play a bit. We're
I
running
think
out, but yes, the
yes,
zine is a different beast. Pick up your work and play with it. Basically, that's all you need to do, and that'll lead you to the form that helps you out. Sorry, we're not able to do a video reading of a book. I think we got too much
no,
piled up.
but I think what we are left off and where we are leaving it off, I think it's a very good. Having comments here about this wonderful session that everybody enjoyed. So I
And
would
if
like
there
to
are any
thank you.
questions, you can write to me. If you need help making edits or thinking about a book, just write to me. Don't even think twice about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Hope
Thank you.
yeah, in future we can extend it a bit further.
We're going to do a workshop next year. Next
Absolutely.
edition. Right?
Next thing. Thank you so much again. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you so
Thank you
much.
everyone
Thank
for
you. Bye-bye.
yeah. Thank you everyone for joining in.